Origins of a Spy. Warsaw, 1910. The city still wore its scars like medals, divided, proud, waiting for another storm. In a faded mansion on the edge of Mokotów, a young girl named Krystyna Skarbek came into the world, born into nobility that was already fading, and a century that would soon collapse. Her father, Count Jerzy Skarbek, was a man of charm and debts, a gambler with the blood of kings and the habits of a dreamer. Her mother, Stefania, came from a Jewish banking family, practical, clever, the anchor to her husband's chaos. Between them stood Krystyna, all fire and contradiction, half aristocrat, half outsider. Even as a child, she carried a kind of restlessness that frightened her tutors. She climbed rooftops, raced horses, and skied the frozen Tatras faster than any boy would dare. When scolded, she smiled, not with defiance, but with a glint that said, "Rules are suggestions, not boundaries." The shaping of a rebel. The First World War passed like a fever. By the time peace returned, nothing was the same, least of all her family. The Skarbeks had lost their fortune, their land, and their illusions of safety. Her father drank away the rest. When he finally died in 1930, Krystyna sold the last of his horses and left home with nothing but a suitcase and his pocket knife. She was 22, too poor for comfort, too proud for pity. She worked briefly at a car dealership, another time in a tobacco shop, both beneath her by birth but not by will. Every job she took she turned into a lesson: how people lie, how they look when afraid, and how to make them talk when they don't want to. The woman Europe didn't see coming. By the late 1930s, Europe was cracking again. Nations whispered about alliances, journalists wrote of peace, and Krystyna packed her bags for the mountains. She joined a skiing expedition, part sport, part escape, to the frozen borderlands between Poland and Hungary. There, among the snow and silence, she discovered the one thing that would later save her life: how to move across borders without being seen. She could sense danger in the air long before others smelled smoke. When Hitler marched into Czechoslovakia, she already knew Poland would be next. And when war came in September 1939, Krystyna didn't wait for orders. She by war, a spy, in silk gloves and steel resolve. And while the world prepared for invasion, she prepared for infiltration. History would remember her as Churchill's favourite spy, but before that, she was simply a woman who refused to wait for men to decide how freedom should be fought. London, winter 1939. The city smelled of coal smoke and rain, the kind that never truly stopped. The war had just begun, and the world was already running out of hope. In a small office tucked behind Whitehall's heavy doors, a woman waited. She wore a tailored coat, her hands steady on her lap. Her accent was soft, her gaze sharp. Her name on the file read Krystyna Granville, but the man across the desk already knew that wasn't her real one. "You've come to volunteer," he said. "Yes," she replied, "for something more useful than knitting socks." They studied her for a long moment, her poise, her fluency in 6 languages, her confidence that felt like danger. Then someone at the table murmured, "Polish, fluent French, knows the Tatras, God help the Germans." Within weeks, she was recruited into Britain's new clandestine branch, the Special Operations Executive. The SOE's motto was simple: set Europe ablaze. Krystyna intended to start with herself, the first mission. Her first orders came quickly: infiltrate Central Europe, make contact with the Polish resistance, and report on Nazi troop movements. Officially, she was a journalist; unofficially, a ghost crossing borders. She left London on a cold January morning in 1940, travelling under a false passport as Madame Granville, a French woman on business. Her path led through neutral Hungary, and from there into occupied Poland. No one expected her to survive the journey. The mountains were freezing, the patrols merciless, and the Gestapo had begun hunting couriers like wolves. But Krystyna was not like the others. She didn't see the mountains as obstacles, she saw them as camouflage. The border run. It was her first night crossing. The wind cut like glass, snow swallowing every sound. Her guide, a smuggler she'd bribed with vodka and gold, whispered for her to crawl when they neared the ridge. Below them, the valley glowed faintly with the lights of a German patrol. Krystyna pressed her body against the ice and waited. The snow burned her lungs, the silence roared in her ears. When the soldiers passed, she moved again, step by step, until her boots touched Polish soil. Her first mission had officially begun. She reached Krakow 3 days later, disguised as a Red Cross volunteer. Her bag held nothing but medical supplies, morphine, and a mic she despised. Danced in halls where death was being planned, and smiled as she memorized every word. Once, when a Gestapo officer questioned her papers, she feigned indignation, slapped him across the face, and said, "You will apologize to me, or to the ambassador, whichever you prefer." He stammered and let her go. Later that night, she laughed quietly to herself. Fear had no power when she chose to ignore it. Captured, but even legends bleed. In 1941, Krystyna and her companion, the British agent Andrei Kowarsky, were betrayed and arrested in Hungary. The Gestapo had them in custody within hours. In her cell, Krystyna sat under a single light, hands folded neatly, as if waiting for tea. The interrogator paced in front of her, waving her passport. "Madame Granville," he said, "you are not French, you are a spy." She tilted her head. "If you already know, then why ask?" He hit her once, open-handed. She didn't flinch. When they threatened execution, she coughed, then began to fake signs of tuberculosis, biting her own tongue to draw blood. Panicked, the guards moved her to a civilian hospital, fearing infection. That night, Krystyna and Kowarsky escaped through a bathroom window, hijacked a car, and vanished into the countryside. She never forgot that cell, or the sound of the interrogator's boots fading behind her. Return to the shadows. By late 1942, Krystyna was back in the field. Her code name was whispered through the underground like a rumour. La Belle Espionne, the beautiful spy. The Gestapo placed her on their most wanted list, but she was unstoppable. Her charm was armour, her will a blade. She could talk her way into a military dinner and walk out with the map of an entire division. In one intercepted note, a German officer wrote, "She moves through Europe like a ghost wrapped in silk." Even London, far from the front, began to take notice. Reports of her missions reached Churchill himself, who allegedly called her "my favourite spy." A war without rest. By 1943, Krystyna had survived more near-death encounters than most soldiers in a lifetime. She had watched friends die, missions fail, and cities burn. Yet she returned again and again, with the same smile, the same dangerous calm. When asked once how she kept spring 1943, Europe was a wound that refused to heal, and Krystyna Skarbek, now Krystyna Granville, danced right across its bleeding edges. The Allies called her indispensable. The Gestapo called her the woman without a face. Everyone else called her a rumour. Crossing lines. By now, Krystyna's reputation had become her greatest weapon and her greatest risk. She moved through Hungary, Slovakia and southern Poland, carrying forged documents that could get her shot in an instant. Each crossing was a ritual, a silent pact with death. A scarf to cover her face, a forged signature, a half-smile that disarmed every soldier she met. Sometimes she carried microfilm sewn into her dress, other times coded messages hidden in a lipstick tube. She could drink brandy with German officers by night and relay their plans by dawn. But beneath the polished surface, the nerves were raw. Her diary from that time had just one line scrawled in pencil. "If fear comes, smile wider." The encounter in Krakow. One evening she met a Gestapo officer in a Krakow cafe. He had been following her for weeks, or perhaps she had been letting him. They sat across from each other over coffee that smelled faintly of ash. "You have a strange accent, Fraulein," he said. "That's because I'm from everywhere," she replied. He smiled, amused, maybe a little charmed. He never saw her hands slip the folded map from his coat pocket as she leaned in to light his cigarette. By the time he noticed, she was already gone, leaving behind only the smell of perfume and danger. That night, her intelligence saved an entire resistance cell from being wiped out, but she didn't write about that. She only wrote, "One more dance, one more mask." Betrayal in Budapest. In the summer of 1943, her mission went wrong. A courier she trusted, a Polish man with kind eyes, sold her name to the Germans for a handful of banknotes. They found her apartment before dawn. Krystyna fled barefoot into the streets, the cobblestones cutting her feet. She hid in a convent for 3 days, pretending to be a mute nun. When Gestapo agents searched the place, she sat among the others, her hands folded, eyes closed, lips moving in prayer. The officer passed by her once, twice, and then left. That night, she escaped through the back gate, carried the knife everywhere, not as a weapon, but as a reminder. Operation Digne, Prelude. By 1944, Krystyna was transferred to southern France under a new command. Her next mission would become the one that made her immortal. But at that moment, it felt like just another suicide assignment. Her orders? Link up with the French resistance, rescue captured SOE agents, and disrupt German communications before the Allied landings. When she arrived in the small town of Digne-les-Bains, she found chaos. The local resistance shattered, its leaders imprisoned, the Gestapo in control. Her fellow agents had already been captured, including Francis Camer, the head of the SOE network in the region. Everyone said it was hopeless. Krystyna disagreed. Hopeless, she said, just means we haven't tried everything yet. The dance continues. In the days that followed, she began to spin her web. She visited the Gestapo office disguised as a Red Cross nurse, carrying a basket of cigarettes and morphine. She smiled at the guards, flirted with the officers, and memorized every door and corridor. Then, she met with the local prefect, an opportunist who worked for whoever paid him best. Krystyna paid him in charm and lies. She told him she was the niece of a high-ranking British official, that she could offer gold, protection, and safe passage after the war. He hesitated, and then agreed to help. Step by step, she turned the enemy's arrogance into her ally. Every word was a move in a dance she had been perfecting since the first day she lied to stay alive. The shadow of death. The night before the rescue, she wrote one more note to herself. Tomorrow, I walk into hell again, but I will do it wearing lipstick. History would remember Operation Digne as one of the most daring rescues of the war, but for Krystyna Granville, it was just another waltz with danger, and the beginning of the legend that would make her both famous and forgotten. August 1944. Southern France was a land trembling between war and liberation. The Allies were advancing from the coast, the Germans were desperate, and the Gestapo more dangerous than ever. In the mountain town of Digne-les-Bains, the streets smelled of dust, fear, and cheap tobacco. 3 British agents from the Special Operations Executive, Francis Camer, Zan Fielding, and Christian Sorensen, had been captured. They were held in the local Gestapo prison. Their execution was scheduled for the next morning, and somewhere between the fields and the hills, Krystyna Granville was walking straight into the jaws of hell. The impossible mission. When the resistance told her what had happened, she didn't hesitate. Others argued, begged her not to go. But Krystyna simply adjusted her coat, tied her hair, and said quietly, "I've talked my way out of worse places. I'll talk them out of theirs." She spent the night planning every detail, her cover story, her tone, even the perfume she would wear. She believed in first impressions. Even death had to respect elegance. By dawn, she walked into the Gestapo office dressed as if she owned the place, calm, composed, and carrying only a handbag and an aura of command. The face of the enemy. The officer in charge was Albert Schenk, a man feared even by his own subordinates. When she entered his office, he didn't rise, he just stared, assessing the woman who dared to walk in unannounced. "Who are you?" he asked in German. "Someone who can make your life much easier," she answered in perfect French. He smirked, intrigued. Krystyna placed a folder on his desk, forged documents, all official-looking. Inside were letters implying that she was connected to high-ranking officials in the British command, and that the captured agents were crucial to future negotiations. "If you execute them," she said softly, "the Allies will hold you personally responsible. But if you release them, you will be remembered as the man who prevented unnecessary bloodshed." Schenk leaned back, amused. "You are bluffing, Fräulein." "Then call the bluff," she said, and smiled. A game of fear and grace. What followed was a duel of nerves. For nearly an hour, Krystyna spoke, weaving half-truths, charm, and calculated fear into every sentence. She mentioned Allah said. Schenk hesitated, then nodded. He called in 2 guards and gave the order to delay the executions. But Krystyna wasn't done. "Not delay," she corrected softly. "Release." He stared at her for a long moment, then, slowly, Unbelievably, he signed the papers. The liberation. At dawn, Krystyna walked out of the prison gates with all 3 prisoners. They were dazed, bruised, silent. The guards looked away as she passed. One of them whispered, almost reverently, "Die schöne Engländerin," the beautiful Englishwoman. Krystyna didn't look back. She simply said, "Walk faster." They disappeared into the countryside, hiding in barns and fields until the resistance smuggled them to safety. When London received word of the rescue, the message was brief. Operation Dina successful. All agents alive. The legend spreads. Word of what she'd done spread across the Allied networks like wildfire. Churchill himself reportedly read her report twice and smiled. One SOE officer wrote, "No man could have done it, but she was no ordinary woman." From that moment, Krystyna Granville became more than just a spy. She was a myth, a whispered story soldiers told each other for courage. But behind the legend was a woman who hadn't slept for 3 nights, who shook when no one was watching, and who knew that each victory only bought her a little more time. The cost of glory. That night, as she sat by a river outside the village, she washed the dirt and blood from her hands. The water ran red for a moment, then clear again. She whispered to herself, "They lived. That's all that matters." She lit a cigarette, took a long drag, and looked at the sky. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to cry. Not from fear, but from exhaustion. The rescue at Dina-les-Bains became one of the most daring intelligence operations of the Second World War. But Krystyna Granville never called it heroism. To her, it was simply another mission. Another lie told well enough to save the truth. Autumn 1944. The war was nearing its end, but for Krystyna Granville, the world had grown quieter only on the surface. Beneath it, everything screamed. The Allies were advancing. France was rising from the ashes, and yet Krystyna, the woman who could outwit the Gestapo, was starting to lose her grip on peace. The ghost of Dina. The rescue at Dina had made her a legend. Her name, whispered through resistance channels, carried the weight of myth. But Krystyna herself hated it. "I am not a hero," she told a friend. "Heroes die for an audience. I survive, in silence." She stayed behind in France, unwilling to rest. She worked under false names, moving weapons, messages and fugitives. Each mission left another scar, invisible but deep. When she closed her eyes at night, she still saw the prison door in Dina, and sometimes in her dreams, it was she who didn't walk out. Between 2 worlds, she no longer belonged anywhere. To the British, she was a useful tool, exotic, unpredictable, impossible to control. To the French resistance, she was both admired and feared. To the Poles, she was a symbol of a country that no longer existed. And Krystyna herself, she belonged to no one. Her letters to London became more erratic, fragments of exhaustion and irony. "If I die," she wrote once, "it will not be from a bullet, but from boredom when peace finally comes." Love and loneliness. During those last months, Krystyna's closest companion was still Andrei Koversky, her fellow agent and once her lover. They had been through prison, exile and near death together. He adored her, she cared for him deeply, but she could not love him the way he loved her. Her heart, if she still had one, belonged to the war. They met briefly in Marseille in late 44, sitting in a smoky cafe filled with soldiers who didn't yet know the fighting was almost over. He reached for her hand and said, "When this ends, what will you do?" Krystyna smiled faintly. "I'll have to invent another war." The fall of shadows. In April 1945, when the Germans began to retreat, Krystyna was sent north to help coordinate the liberation efforts. She saw villages burned, civilians executed, children wandering among ruins, and yet her reports to London were dry, efficient, precise, as if emotion were a liability she couldn't afford. But even she, certificates, polite handshakes. But after years of being vital, she now felt invisible. She worked briefly as a stewardess, then as a clerk, then as nothing at all. War had given her purpose. Peace took it away. The beginning of forgetting. One evening in London, she attended a formal dinner. A general raised his glass and said, "To the brave men who risked their lives for victory." Krystyna laughed softly. "And to the women," she said, "who did it wearing heels." A few nearby officers smiled awkwardly. They had no idea who she was. That night she walked home alone through the fog, heels echoing on wet pavement. She stopped by the Thames and stared into the black water. No medals, no missions, no enemy, only the sound of the city pretending that peace had arrived. The invisible hero. Krystyna Granville had saved lives, stolen secrets, bluffed the Gestapo, and outsmarted death itself. But now, in a world that no longer needed spies, she was just another stranger with a foreign accent and a restless soul. And somewhere deep inside, she missed the only thing that ever made sense to her: the dance with danger. History writes about wars as if they end with victory, but for people like Krystyna Granville, the war never truly ended. It simply went underground, inside the heart. London, 1952. The war had been over for 7 years, but for Krystyna Granville the peace felt like exile. The city that once hummed with coded messages and sirens was now calm, too calm. She lived in a small, rented room near Kensington, her medals stored in a drawer, her past sealed behind the word classified. To her neighbours, she was just another foreign woman with an accent and a mysterious smile. They didn't know that she'd once walked into a Gestapo prison and walked out with 3 lives in her hands. The forgotten hero. The British government had promised its agents honour and gratitude. Instead, many were dismissed, forgotten, or quietly pushed aside. Krystyna was no exception. She applied for posts with the Foreign Office, the Intelligence Service, even as a translator, and was politely rejected each time. There was no place for a woman like her in peacetime. She'd been built for danger, not bureaucracy. At night, she would take long walks through the city, the same streets where she'd once carried coded messages under her coat. She'd pause under street lamps, staring at her reflection in the shop windows. The face staring back was still beautiful, but older now, thinner, lonelier. "They needed me to fight," she wrote in one of her last letters, "but they never imagined I'd have to live." The shadow in her mirror. For a time, she worked as a stewardess on a ship travelling between London and Cairo. It wasn't espionage, but at least it felt like movement. She charmed passengers, told stories that sounded like fiction, and laughed as though she wasn't breaking apart inside. But loneliness clung to her like smoke. She had lovers but no home, friends but no purpose. One of those admirers was Dennis Muldowney, a fellow crew member, quiet, intense, and hopelessly infatuated with her. Krystyna, ever kind but distant, treated him like a stray dog she couldn't quite turn away. When she ended their brief affair, he began to follow her, shadowing her steps, watching her window, convinced she would return. She didn't notice at first. She was too used to being watched. The last morning, June 15th, 1952, Krystyna returned to her London hotel after a short trip. The staff remembered her smiling, elegant as always, carrying flowers in one hand and her key in the other. An hour later, who stood alone and wept. He placed a single red rose on her coffin and whispered, "You never stopped fighting, even when there was nothing left to fight for." Years later, he would be buried beside her. Recognition at last. For decades, Krystyna's name remained buried in archives and whispers. Her story wasn't declassified until years later, when historians began piecing together the lives of women who had fought in the shadows. And there, among the reports and faded photographs, they found her, smiling faintly at a camera, a silk scarf around her neck, danger in her eyes. Today, in the halls of Britain's intelligence museums, her photograph hangs beside the men she once saved. The caption reads, "Krystyna Skarbek, Krystyna Granville, 1908 to 1952. The first and the bravest of Churchill's spies." History often remembers the loud heroes, the generals, the politicians, the men with medals. But in the quiet corners of every war, there are women like Krystyna. Those who fought unseen, loved recklessly, and carried courage like a second skin. Her war ended in a hotel room, not on a battlefield, but her legacy never died. Some battles end with victory, others end with silence. Krystyna Granville lived and died in both.